Former black officer had enough of Karen trespassing in his pool, so he teaches her a lesson. Imagine working your whole life for a single goal. Imagine sacrificing time, comfort, and peace of mind to achieve it. Now imagine that goal, that dream home, becoming the epicenter of a nightmare, not because of your actions, but because of the petty, racially charged malice of a neighbor. Michael Carter, a former cop, had finally achieved his dream. But his moment of triumph was about to turn into a battle for his right to exist peacefully in his own home. What's the matter? Michael Carter had always dreamed of this moment, lounging by his crystal-clear swimming pool in the backyard of his newly purchased home in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. The former police officer with 15 years of dedicated service had worked tirelessly to achieve this milestone, putting in countless overtime hours and saving every penny. His two-story home was a symbol of everything he had worked for, a reward for years of discipline, patience, and resilience. He had imagined peace, relaxation, and the satisfaction of finally owning a piece of the American dream. However, his moment of tranquility was about to be shattered in a way he never expected. As he leaned back in his lounge chair, eyes closed, enjoying the warm Georgia sun, the sudden wail of police sirens pierced the air, snapping him out of his blissful state. Michael sat up, immediately on alert, as two patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of his house. The scene felt all too familiar. He had been on the other side of this situation too many times. But this time, it was different. He wasn't responding to a call, he was the call. He watched as two officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters, approaching his fence with the cautious authority that officers used when confronting a potential threat. His stomach tightened. He had a sinking feeling that he already knew who had made the call. "Sir, we received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in this pool area," one of the officers stated, his tone firm but neutral. Michael's jaw clenched. Suspicious individual? Trespassing? He let out a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. This wasn't his first time dealing with this kind of situation, but he had never imagined he would be the target in his own home. Through the corner of his eye, he caught a familiar movement in the house next door. He turned just in time to see Karen Thompson, his neighbor, peeking through her curtains with a smug smile on her face. Michael had seen that look before, a look of triumph, of someone who believed they had won. But Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. With years of law enforcement experience under his belt, Michael knew better than to react out of anger. Instead, he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the officers with controlled confidence. He wasn't about to let Karen's passive-aggressive racism go unchecked, and little did she know, this was the beginning of her downfall. 2 months earlier, Michael Carter proudly moved into his dream home, unaware that his biggest challenge wouldn't come from homeownership, but from the neighbor next door. It started subtly, the lingering stares, the hushed whispers among other residents, the unreturned waves when he greeted passersby. But nothing prepared him for his first encounter with Karen Thompson, the self-appointed gatekeeper of the neighborhood. The day after he moved in, Michael took a trip to the hardware store for supplies. As he was loading paint cans into his car, his security camera sent an alert to his phone. Curious, he checked the live feed, and what he saw made his blood boil. Karen Thompson was in his backyard. Wearing a designer swimsuit, carrying an expensive beach towel, she casually strolled to his poolside, placed her things on one of his lounge chairs, and dipped her feet in his water as if she owned the place. By the time Michael got home, Karen was fully reclining in his pool chair, sipping a drink, her phone in hand as if she were at a resort. He approached her, clearing his throat to announce his presence. Karen opened her eyes lazily, feigning surprise, her manicured hand flying to her chest in mock innocence. "Oh," she said with a forced laugh, "I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy." Michael's expression remained unreadable, though inside, rage bubbled beneath his calm exterior. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice level, "I'm the owner of this home." Karen's face froze for a fraction of a second before she quickly composed herself. "Wait, you bought this house?" Her tone was laced with disbelief, as if the very idea was unfathomable. "There must be some mistake," she continued, shifting uncomfortably. I know the realtor handling this property, and she never mentioned. She stopped, waving vaguely at him, her racist assumption hanging thick in the air. There's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson, Michael said firmly, folding his arms. This is my home, and you're trespassing. I'd appreciate it if you'd ask for permission before stepping onto my property. Karen's smile faltered, replaced with something sharper, a flicker of resentment. She huffed, gathered her things, and muttered under her breath, We'll see about that. Michael watched her retreat through his gate, but he knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was the type to escalate when she didn't get her way. And if there was one thing Michael had learned from years on the force, it was this. People like her didn't stop until they were stopped. In the weeks that followed their first confrontation, Karen Thompson's behavior went from annoying to outright audacious. At first, it was just the lingering glances from her second-story window, the way she would quickly duck behind her curtains whenever Michael looked up. But then the incidents started piling up, little acts of defiance and intrusion that escalated with each passing day. Michael knew she wasn't just nosy, she was trying to make a statement. One Saturday morning, Michael was jolted awake by the sound of splashing and laughter. Confused, he peered out his bedroom window and his stomach dropped. There, lounging in his backyard, Karen had brought 4 of her friends for an unauthorized pool party. Women in designer swimsuits reclined on his lounge chairs, champagne flutes in hand as they giggled and chatted as if this were a 5-star resort. Michael stormed onto his patio, his voice a controlled warning. You need to leave. Now, this is private property. Karen, draped in an expensive cover-up, barely turned her head. She waved a dismissive hand as if he were a waiter interrupting her relaxation. Oh, don't be so difficult, Michael, she said smoothly. We're just enjoying the pool. Besides, this pool barely gets any use, right? One of her friends looked mortified, whispering urgently, Karen, you said you had permission, as she scrambled to gather her things. But Karen wasn't backing down. She stood up, her wine glass in hand, and gave Michael a pointed, smug smile. The previous owners always let me use the pool, she said sweetly, as if that justified her blatant trespassing. And I have friends in the precinct, you know. My husband plays golf with Captain Richards. I doubt you want to make trouble over something so trivial. Michael felt the heat rise in his chest, but he didn't let it show. He dealt with plenty of entitled people in his years as an officer. He knew the trick was to stay calm, document everything, and let their own actions expose them. Mrs. Thompson, this is your final warning, he said evenly. The next time you trespass, I'm calling the police. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes, but her friends weren't as confident. Karen, let's just go, one of them muttered, quickly making her way to the gate. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind their wine glasses, expensive towels, and a trail of entitlement. That afternoon, Michael installed security cameras. Years on the force had taught him one thing: document everything. And sure enough, within days, the footage started rolling in. Karen testing his gate, peering through his windows, and even attempting to use an old key copy from the previous owners. But the final straw came when he returned home from the store one evening and found his backyard full of uninvited guests. 8 women, drinking wine and flipping through books, sprawled across his patio furniture. His once private pool had been transformed into the official meeting spot for Karen's book club. Michael didn't bother with warnings this time. He pulled out his phone and called the police. By the time Officers Davis and Martinez arrived, Karen had already switched tactics. Tears welled in her eyes as she put on her best victim act. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried. "This man is harassing us. We've always had pool privileges with the previous owners, and he's being completely unreasonable." Michael stood silently, arms crossed, waiting for the moment of recognition. It didn't take long. Officer Martinez's eyes flickered with familiarity, and he let out a short, knowing chuckle. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "Michael Carter was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing. Please leave before we have to make this official." Karen's face turned beet red as the other women hurriedly grabbed their things, hissing in embarrassment. But as she passed Michael on her way out, her anger burned through her humiliation. "This isn't over," she whispered. "You don't belong here, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." Michael didn't flinch. He just watched her walk away, knowing full well that she had just declared war. Michael had dealt with entitled people before, but Karen Thompson was taking things to a new level. After her humiliating book club eviction, she doubled down on her efforts to make life miserable for him. It started small. First, his morning newspaper disappeared. At first, he thought it was a coincidence, but after checking his security footage, he caught Karen herself at 6 a.m., sneaking up to his porch in her bathrobe and swiping the paper with a smirk. Then, there were the anonymous complaints. The Homeowners Association, HOA, suddenly had an issue with his property, despite the fact that his lawn was neatly trimmed and his landscaping was pristine. Karen had started a campaign claiming his house was lowering property values. Online, she took it further. A mysterious post appeared on the neighborhood Facebook page. The comments were immediate. Some of the neighbors questioned it, but others, particularly Karen's equally entitled friends, jumped in, supporting the idea that Michael didn't belong. But Karen wasn't done. One morning, Michael walked outside to check his rose garden, something he had been proud of since moving in, and stopped dead in his tracks. Every single flower was dead. The plants, which had been thriving just the day before, were now shriveled and blackened, as if something had been poured over them. Michael didn't even need to wonder who was responsible. He checked the security cameras, and there she was at 11:47 p.m., under the cover of darkness, sneaking into his yard with a spray bottle in hand, dousing his roses with something. That was the final straw. The next HOA meeting was packed. Karen had clearly planned a spectacle, standing at the front with a clipboard in hand, ready to make her case. "As you all know," she said dramatically, "property values in our community are extremely important. I've spoken with several residents who feel uneasy with recent changes." Michael, calm as ever, stood up. "You mean me, don't you, Mrs. Thompson?" Karen's lips curled into a fake smile. "Now, Michael," she cooed, "I wasn't referring to anyone specifically." "Oh no?" Michael pulled out his phone. With one tap, the footage of Karen vandalizing his roses played on the big screen. Gasps filled the room. Someone murmured, "Is that Karen?" Another whispered, "That's his yard." Karen's face turned pale, then red. "That's taken out of context," she stammered. Michael crossed his arms. "So what's the context where you're caught on video in my yard killing my plants?" She opened her mouth, then shut it just as quickly. The room was dead silent. The HOA president, who had been watching the footage with disgust, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, this is completely unacceptable behavior." Karen huffed, her face twisting into anger. "I was checking for suspicious activity. Someone's been damaging properties in the neighborhood." Michael tilted his head. "Yes, and now we know exactly who that someone is." Laughter broke out in the room. Karen, realizing she had no defense left, grabbed her clipboard and stormed out. Michael thought that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't done. That night, he walked outside to check his security cameras, and what he saw made his blood boil. His pool water, which was normally crystal clear, was now covered in white foam. He leaned in. The strong scent of dish soap filled the air. She had sabotaged his pool. Michael stood there, watching bubbles float on the surface, and then he smiled. Because this time, he had the perfect way to handle her. Michael had seen plenty of reckless people in his years on the force. But Karen Thompson was something else. Destroying his garden was bad enough, but now she had escalated to tampering with his pool. If she thought he was just going to sit back and let her get away with it, she was in for a rude awakening. That night, Michael sat in his office, reviewing his security footage. There was Karen, creeping into his yard at midnight, a large jug in her hand. He zoomed in on the label industrial-strength dish soap. She had dumped the entire thing into his pool before sneaking back home, probably thinking she had won. Michael leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and exhaled slowly. She wanted to play games? Fine. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey Greg, it's Carter. You still have that pool dye formula we used in that old case?" A chuckle on the other end. "Man, I haven't thought about that stuff in years. Why? You planning some harmless fun?" Michael smirked. "Something like that." Within 24 hours, Michael had exactly what he needed. A special type of dye used by professional pool maintenance companies to detect leaks. Completely safe, completely temporary, and best of all, it only reacted to certain chemicals found in cosmetics and sunscreen. Karen and her entitled little friends would be in for a shock. Michael didn't have to wait long. Word spread through the neighborhood that Karen was planning another unauthorized pool party at his house. She had even been overheard at the local cafe, saying, "Oh, he's never home on Saturdays. It's practically community property at this point." Michael grinned when he heard the news. He let her think she was right. That Saturday morning, he packed a fake gym bag, grabbed his keys, and drove away. But instead of heading to the gym, he parked his car around the corner and snuck back into his house through the side gate. He settled into his home office, where he had a perfect view of the backyard. Right on cue, his security app pinged. There she was. Karen marched through the back gate like she owned the place, her friends in tow, laughing and carrying expensive designer bags. "Ladies," Karen announced dramatically, "welcome to my weekend retreat." One by one, the women slathered on sunscreen, adjusted their oversized sunglasses, and slipped into the pool. Michael watched with satisfaction. It only took a few minutes for the first scream. "Karen, what's happening to my skin?" Karen's friend Susan scrambled out of the pool, staring at her arms in horror. A distinct green tint was spreading across her hands and face. Karen, looking down at her own now bright green legs, let out a shriek so loud that Michael almost felt bad for her. Almost? Michael leaned back in his chair, watching karma work its magic. This was just the beginning. Karen had always assumed she could get away with anything. Trespassing? Not a problem. Vandalizing a neighbor's property? Who would stop her? Calling the police on an innocent man in his own backyard? Just another day in her privileged life. But today was different. As soon as she and her entitled friends dove into the water, the dye went to work. Michael sat calmly in his home office, watching the security feed as the first streaks of green began to appear. At first, it was subtle, a faint tint creeping up their arms and legs, just enough to make them pause. "Karen, what the hell is happening?" one woman shrieked, holding up her arms. Karen, lounging casually on a pool float, frowned at the woman, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Susan, relax," she scoffed. "It's probably just the pool chemicals mixing with your sunscreen." Susan, however, wasn't convinced. No, this is wrong. Look at my hands." She rubbed at her skin, but the green only deepened. And then the real chaos began. The dye spread rapidly, reacting to every trace of sunscreen, lotion, and expensive foundation they had layered on before the party. Within seconds, their arms, legs, and faces were turning a deep, unmistakable shade of emerald green. "Oh my God, my face!" another woman wailed, grabbing her reflection in a compact mirror. Her perfectly contoured cheekbones were now the color of a cartoon villain. Karen's smirk vanished. She sat up, examining her own arms, then gasped. "What is this?" she screamed, flailing in the water, sending waves splashing against the pool's edge. She rubbed at her skin, but it wouldn't come off. If anything, it only became darker. Michael bit back a laugh. He had read all about the dye. It was completely safe, non-toxic, and temporary, but the one little catch, it would take at least a week to fade completely. Meanwhile, in the backyard, panic had reached its peak. One of the women sprinted for the gate, slipping on the wet concrete, her flip-flops skidding across the pavement as she shrieked, "I have an interview on Monday. I can't be green for an interview." Another tripped over a lounge chair, spilling a full bottle of champagne onto Karen's expensive towel. Karen, for the first time in her entitled life, looked genuinely horrified. She whirled around, eyes blazing, searching for anyone to blame. And that's when she saw it. The security camera? Its tiny red light blinked cheerfully, aimed directly at her. Michael could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Her face contorted in rage, her hands curled into fists, and with a furious screech, she stormed toward the camera, waving her green arms in wild frustration. "Michael, I know you did this. You can't get away with it." Michael, sitting in his office, chuckled and shook his head. He tapped his phone and spoke calmly into the microphone connected to the outdoor speakers. "Funny, Karen, you didn't seem to mind trespassing on my property earlier." Karen froze. Her friends, still panicking, turned toward the speaker, their expressions a mixture of shock and realization. Michael leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "By the way, ladies, I hope you enjoy your new look. Should fade in about a week, maybe 2. The screams that followed were music to his ears. The neighborhood would never forget what happened next. 6 green women ran through the streets, their expensive cover-ups flapping behind them, screeching like extras from a horror movie. Some tried covering their faces with towels, while others darted between houses, trying to sneak back home unseen. Unfortunately for them, it was all caught on camera. Michael's security footage showed them leaping over fences, dodging confused joggers, and even one unfortunate soul trying to rinse off in a neighbor's garden hose only to realize it made things worse. And then the cherry on top. Karen, still soaked and fuming, stormed up to her house only to find her husband standing at the door, his face a mask of sheer disbelief. "What the hell happened to you?" Karen's green face twisted in anger. "Michael did this, he set me up." Her husband's eyebrows shot up. "You mean you broke into his pool again?" Karen froze. For the first time, she realized just how bad this looked. Her husband let out a deep, exhausted sigh. "Karen, we need to talk." Michael, watching from his living room, smirked and took a sip of lemonade. This was better than he could have imagined. Karen had spent years manipulating situations to her advantage, believing she could do whatever she wanted without facing consequences. But today was different. Today, she had pushed too far, and for the first time in her entitled life, she was about to learn that actions have consequences. As soon as her feet touched the pavement outside Michael's backyard, the reality of her situation hit her. Her once pristine, carefully maintained skin was now an unmistakable shade of emerald green. She ran her hands over her arms in disbelief, her breaths coming out in short, frantic gasps. This isn't real. This can't be real." Her friends, equally horrified, gawked at their own reflections in phone screens, mirrors, and the horrified eyes of onlookers. One woman burst into tears. "My daughter's wedding is in 5 days. I have a board meeting tomorrow. What the hell did he do to us?" The once giggling group of elite suburban women had turned into a hysterical mob, pacing in circles, clawing at their faces, shrieking at the sight of their discolored skin. Some ran toward their cars, desperate to escape the humiliating spectacle. Karen, her fury boiling hotter than the Georgia sun, stormed up to Michael's front door, pounding on it with both fists. "Michael, open this door right now," she shrieked, her voice cracking from rage. "You can't get away with this." Michael, watching from the security camera feed inside, calmly picked up his phone. With the press of a button, the outdoor speakers crackled to life. "Karen, you and your friends have exactly 60 seconds to get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." Karen whirled around, scanning her surroundings. She spotted the security cameras blinking in amusement, catching every second of her public meltdown. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She had been outplayed. "You think this is funny, Michael?" she screamed. "I'll sue you for this." Michael chuckled. "For what, Karen? Using legal, non-toxic pool dye in my own pool? The same pool you've repeatedly trespassed into? Be my guest." Karen's jaw tightened as she realized how impossible it would be to spin this situation in her favor. Her lawyer wouldn't even return her calls if he saw the footage of her breaking in, throwing pool parties, and being warned multiple times before today's grand finale. One of her friends grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the street. "Karen, we have to go. People are staring." And they were. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some holding their phones up, capturing every moment. A couple walking their dogs stopped mid-step, their mouths open in astonishment. Karen let out a furious screech, but deep down, she knew this battle was over. As she turned to leave, Michael delivered the final blow. "Oh, and Karen, green really isn't your color." The neighborhood erupted in laughter. Karen sped off in her luxury SUV, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, even under the green. But no matter how fast she drove away, she couldn't outrun her new reputation. She had been humiliated, publicly, permanently, and the internet was about to make sure she never lived it down. Karen spent the rest of the evening scrubbing her skin raw, desperate to remove the humiliating green tint that refused to fade. She tried everything: lemon juice, baking soda, vinegar baths, even expensive skin treatments, but nothing worked. The reality sank in like a heavy stone in her stomach. She would be green for days. And the worst part? Michael had captured everything. By the time she woke up the next morning, the damage was already irreversible, not to her skin, but to her reputation. The security footage of her trespassing, throwing unauthorized pool parties, and finally turning into a green nightmare had already gone viral. At first, she thought it was just the nosy neighborhood group chat, but then it hit social media. Entitled Karen Gets a Taste of Poolside Justice. She thought she was untouchable until she turned green. When you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. The comments were ruthless. "This is the most satisfying karma story I've ever seen." "She trespassed on someone's property multiple times and is now mad? LOL. "What brand of pool dye did Michael use? Asking for a friend." Karen screamed into a pillow as she scrolled through thousands of comments and retweets, each one cementing her as the latest internet villain. It wasn't just online, her professional life started unraveling too. Her real estate firm was flooded with emails and calls from concerned clients who didn't want their properties associated with someone accused of trespassing and harassment. The company's social media pages were spammed with green heart emojis and pool-related jokes. By noon, her boss had sent her a message. "Karen, we need to talk. Immediately." By evening, she was unemployed. And if that wasn't bad enough, the HOA had also turned against her. The very same people she once manipulated were now demanding disciplinary action. Michael's video, showing her tampering with his yard, breaking into his backyard, and poisoning his flowers, was the final nail in the coffin. A week later, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. She had no choice. She couldn't stay in the neighborhood she once ruled. Everywhere she went, people smirked, whispered, and avoided eye contact. The same people she once looked down on now saw her as nothing more than a joke. Michael, on the other hand, he was thriving. His once isolated and tense relationship with his neighbors had completely transformed. Families gathered around his pool, kids splashed and played, and friendly conversations replaced the cold stares of the past. The HOA, finally rid of Karen's tyranny, became a peaceful, welcoming community once again. And as for Karen, she tried to start fresh in another neighborhood, but karma wasn't finished with her yet. Karen packed up what was left of her dignity and moved to a new neighborhood across town, far away from the humiliation that had driven her out. She thought she could escape her past, but the internet had other plans. The moment her real estate listing went live, it was flooded with green heart emojis, pool memes, and sarcastic inquiries about chlorine-resistant sunscreen. The viral stain of her actions followed her, making it difficult for her to sell at the price she wanted. In the end, she had to settle for a lower offer, losing thousands of dollars just to get out. Arriving at her new home, Karen convinced herself this was a fresh start. New neighbors, new surroundings, a place where no one knew about the infamous green pool party. For the first few weeks, she kept her head down, avoided neighborhood gatherings, and tried to rebuild. But Karen was still Karen. She couldn't help herself. It started small, complaining about a neighbor's mailbox color, filing noise complaints about kids playing outside, and demanding the HOA enforce stricter rules on lawn decorations. The neighbors at first tried to be patient, assuming she was just a perfectionist. But then she made a mistake. One morning, she stormed into an HOA meeting, demanding that a local family stop using the community tennis court. She claimed it was an exclusive area that shouldn't be shared with just anyone. What she didn't know, someone in that meeting had seen the viral video. A murmur spread through the room. Whispers turned into chuckles. Someone pulled out their phone, and within seconds, the whole meeting was buzzing. "Wait a minute," someone said. "Aren't you the pool lady?" Her entire body tensed as the realization hit they knew. A man near the back of the room turned his phone around, playing the infamous clip of her green-tinted escape. The room erupted in laughter. Karen's face turned beet red, not green this time, but just as humiliating. Her new beginning had just ended before it even started. Karen stormed out of the HOA meeting, her face burning with embarrassment. She had barely lasted a month in this new neighborhood, and already her past had caught up to her. She had planned to climb the social ladder again, positioning herself as a respected member of the community. But now, she was a joke. The whispers didn't stop after the meeting. Neighbors avoided her. Some simply smirked when she walked by, others outright ignored her. She noticed one house had a green garden gnome mysteriously appear on the front lawn, and another had a "No Trespassing" sign featuring a pool icon and bright green letters. Karen tried to act as if it didn't bother her. She still walked around the neighborhood with her usual sense of self-importance, but she could feel it, the judgment, the silent ridicule. Then came the final blow. One evening, her husband came home looking exhausted. "Karen, we need to talk?" She barely looked up. "What now?" "I lost a major client today. Word got around about you." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "People don't want to work with someone tied to a viral scandal. It's embarrassing." Karen felt her stomach drop. She had been so focused on controlling the neighborhood, she hadn't thought about how it could affect her husband's career. "We can fix this," she said quickly. "Maybe a press statement." "No, Karen," he cut her off, shaking his head. "No more damage control, no more HOA meetings, no more trying to run things. Just stop." For the first time, Karen had nothing to say. She looked out the window at the neighborhood she had once hoped to control. Now it controlled her. And for once, Karen had to accept that she had no power left at all. Life teaches us that respect is not demanded, it is earned. Those who build their lives on entitlement and manipulation may enjoy temporary power, but in the end, truth always prevails. Karen's downfall serves as a reminder that our actions shape our reputation, and once lost, trust is nearly impossible to regain. For the elderly, this lesson holds even greater weight. We have witnessed the rise and fall of many, learning that character and integrity last longer than status or control. The story reminds us that humility opens doors, while arrogance eventually locks them shut. True power is not about dominating others, but fostering genuine relationships built on kindness, fairness, and community. In our later years, peace and respect matter far more than pride and vanity. The way we treat others is the legacy we leave behind. And in the end, the world remembers those who uplifted others, not those who sought to tear them down.